little apartment is just full of stuff that's in the phases of getting slowly brought in through the airlock into our home. And every day I pass it and I'm like, I can't clean this. I can't. I'm not allowed. It's brutal.
I love leaving clutter. It makes me feel like a god. You're like, seems like a problem for another time. All right, well, let's go ahead and get this started. First of all, hello. As I mentioned before, you're in the right place. This is the We Love Bookstores event fundraiser for Dark Carnival Books in Berkeley. Dark Carnival is an amazing independent science fiction fantasy bookstore that looks to me the way that I think canonical indie bookstores do, with like books stacked up on shelves and falling onto the floor and everywhere that you look. So we're so excited to support them today. We Love Bookstores has raised, with this event, just over $60,000 for independent bookstores around the Bay Area, and that's thanks to all of you and to people who've come to our many events. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to do. I'm Maggie Takuta Hall. I'm the author of The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, and I'm going to be your host today. During this event, you can submit questions to Evan, who is the moderator, for our authors. So go ahead at any time if you have any questions for them, send them to Evan. Evan will send them to me, and I will put the authors on the spot with them later. So without further ado, let's kick this thing off. We have three amazing authors today. We have Michael Zapata, who is the author of The Lost Book of Adana Moreau. He is a founding editor of the award-winning Make literary magazine. He is a recipient of an Illinois Arts Council Award for Fiction, the City of Chicago DCASE Individual Artist Program Award, and a Pushcart nomination. As an educator, he taught literature and writing in high schools, servicing dropout students. He is a graduate of the University of Iowa and has lived in New Orleans, Italy, and Ecuador. He is currently living in Chicago with his family. We have John Scalzi's latest novel is The Last Emperox. Scalzi won the 2006 John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer, the 2013 Hugo Award for Best Novel for Red Shirts, and his debut novel Old Man's War was a finalist for a Hugo Award as well. His other books include The Gross Brigades, The Android's Dream, The Lost Colony, and The Human Division. He has won the Romantic Times Reviewer's Choice Award for Science Fiction, the Seiun, the Kurd Lasowitz, and Geffen Awards. His weblog, The Whatever, is one of the most widely read websites in modern science fiction. Born and raised in California, Scalzi studied at the University of Chicago. He lives in Southern Ohio with his wife and daughter. And we also have Gailey, Sarah Gailey. Sarah is the Hugo Award-winning bestseller, I messed that up. Just for you, friend.
I'm adding this to my list of grievances.
Hugo Award winner and best-selling author Sarah Gailey is an internationally published writer of fiction and nonfiction. Their nonfiction has been published by Mashable and the Boston Globe, and they won a Hugo Award for Best Fan Writer. Their most recent fiction credits include The Vice and The Atlantic. Their debut novella, River of Teeth, was a 2018 Hugo and Nebula Award finalist. Their best-selling adult novel debut, Magic for Liars, is perfect and was published in 2019. Their latest novella, Upright Women Wanted, was published in February 2020. Their young adult novel debut, When We Were Magic, came out in March 2020. You can find links to their work at sarahgailey.com and find them on social media at GaileyFrey. You three, thank you so much for being here. Now, y'all made the tactical error of letting me decide who would read first before we got started here. And so, Gailey, unfortunately, since I know you in real life and delight in making you uncomfortable, I'm going to make you kick us off with your reading.
Well, this is brutal, and I'm really excited to continue adding to my list of grievances with Maggie Takuta Hall, enemy of my happiness and soul. Before I read, I want to thank y'all for putting this event and this entire event series together. Supporting independent bookstores is an amazing cause. It's the cause of my heart, and I think the hearts of a lot of us here today. I grew up in the back room of an independent bookstore that my mom worked at. She would kind of put me back there with some craft supplies and be like, don't ruin anything. And I would go through the boxes and find galleys that were too old for me and smuggle them home and read them and put them back later. I am the menace that I am because of independent bookstores, and I am so excited to be able to support Dark Carnival and independent bookstores everywhere. I'm gonna read, which is what you asked me to do, instead of telling you my life story and affiliation with independent bookstores. I'm gonna be reading from my young adult debut, When We Were Magic. It's here. It looks like this, and you can buy it anywhere books are sold. I'm gonna start right at the beginning because that's my favorite part, and hopefully it'll be yours too. I didn't mean to kill Josh Harper. Really, I didn't. It's just that I was nervous, and condoms are more complicated than I was expecting, and one thing led to another, and what? Now there's blood everywhere, and he's dead. I wipe my hands on the rumpled sheets until they're clean enough that I can pull my underwear on. I put on my bra, but I can't get the hooks done. My hands won't stop shaking. In the end, I leave it unhooked. I pull my dress on over it and struggle to grip the zipper on the side. By the time I get the dress zipped up, blood has stopped pumping out of Josh Harper, and naked feels like 100 years ago. I'm not sure where my shoes are. I know I kicked them off, but I can't remember when or where. I'm turning around in a slow circle, staring at the floor, watching for the flash of my gold heels. I catch a glimpse of myself in the full-length mirror on the back of Josh's door. I'm a blur of bright blue, and I realize that my vision is fuzzy because my eyes are brimming with tears. Okay, I whisper to myself. Okay, just think. I wipe at my eyes and try to look at anything that isn't my reflection or the bed. The room is dark save for the light of a desk lamp, which casts a soft yellow glow on the desk and the bed. Josh is on the bed. There's so much blood on the bed. I smooth my skirt. My palm catches on a patch of glitter, which immediately sheds, raining sparkles onto the carpet. I wipe my hand on a non-glittery section of skirt, leaving behind a bright smear of silver. I frown. I hate glitter. Why did I pick a dress with glitter on it? Probably because Roya said it looked good on me. Even as I stare at my skirt, frowning, I know that I'm not thinking straight, or in shock, I think, but I can't stop glaring at that stupid patch of glitter. I want to scream. I can't believe I didn't already scream. My phone buzzes in my purse, and I nearly have a heart attack. My purse is at the foot of the bed. My phone is buzzing, and I have to get it, and it's on the bed where Josh is, on the bed with all the blood. Shit. Okay, I can do this. I just won't look. I reach over and accidentally grab Josh's foot. It's still warm, and he's still wearing his socks. 10 minutes ago, he was telling me that they weren't his socks. He had borrowed them from his dad. He laughed nervously while I pushed him backward onto the bed, stopping him from taking them off. What's your hurry? He'd asked me, and I'd shoved my mouth onto his instead of answering, and then I let go of his foot and grabbed my purse. It's a little tiny sparkly thing that's totally impractical and only fits my student ID and my cell phone. I fumble with the clasp, which is slippery with blood. My phone buzzes inside again twice in a row. The group text is going crazy. It takes me a long time to reply. Autocorrect can't even interpret the fumbling input of my shaking hands. Josh, bedroom, 911. 5 minutes later, 5 girls pour into the bedroom. My best friends. 4 one-night-in-a-lifetime dresses, plus Polly's powder blue tux. They're all in here, and nobody is missing them because we all went to prom alone together in solidarity with Iris after her boyfriend cheated on her. Well, everyone except Roya, and she ditched tall Matt halfway through the night anyway. And the point is that we're all single, but none of us is alone, and that's how we want it, at least until the end of the year. Why am I thinking about this? There's something else I should be thinking about. Right. I look at the girls. They're all gorgeous, all perfectly themselves and shining with party sweat. And they're all looking at me. They're all looking at me. I can't look back at them. I can't look away. There's nowhere safe for my eyes to land. They're too bright. The colors are too saturated. It's too much. Roya is wearing a deep red gown. I can't look at her. My mouth is dry. My hands are too big. I feel short. Iris looks at me like I'm a monster. She's staring at me, and she's the first one to speak. Well, she says, what the fuck did you do? Here is what I did. I tried to have sex with Josh Harper. I didn't really want to have sex with Josh Harper, but I wanted to have sex with someone, and Josh Harper was around and relatively sober, and I'd felt his boner against the top of my butt when he tried to grind on me at prom, so I figured it wouldn't be too tricky to get him to have sex with me, and I was right. Sort of. Oh my God, Marcelina says, covering her black lipstick mouth with her hands. Oh my God, Alexis, what happened to his dick? Here's what happened to Josh's dick. It exploded.
Thank you, Sarah. That's perfect.
Thank
Still
you.
one of my absolute favorite openings to any YA novel ever. Not enough dick explosions in fiction, honestly.
That's what I've been saying.
Up next, Michael Zapata, are you willing and able to take us away?
Yes, absolutely. My first grievance will be following that. I adore that. Thank you. And also thank you everyone for this invite and for raising this amount of money for local bookstores. I haven't been to the area in a while, but this must have been 10 years ago. Just visiting it was one of the first things I did when I landed in the Bay Area. I looking it up online, and I agree with you. It has that feeling, and it has a feeling I grew up with. I grew up in the Chicago area, and indies have been integral to my life as a reader, as a writer. And also as like one of those lost sort of like skateboarding socialist punk rock kids that needed a place to stay for a while. So we have like Women's and Children's First here in Chicago, where I could, where I actually got to see Noam Chomsky one, things like that, which was so meaningful. And then of course I have to give a shout out to Myopic in Chicago that has a big, beautiful Chicago basement that feels like how a science fiction store should feel. So thank you. This is really meaningful to be able to be here with everyone. So thank you everyone for donating and for coming today. So like I said, what agreements to follow that, but I'll start. Let's do this. I'll start at the beginning as well. Well, you know what? Let's do this. I want to talk a little bit about the history of science fiction. So this takes place in around 1920 in New Orleans. It focuses on a woman named the Dominicana who ends up writing a cult classic science fiction novel about parallel universes. One added benefit to the old mad pirate moving in was that the Dominicana had more free time. During the morning, she kept Maxwell home from school, which she told him on more than one occasion when he pleaded to go would only poison his mind. Instead, at home, at the kitchen table, she went over Spanish and English and history and literature and philosophy and sciences and math with him. He particularly excelled at math. Once, when the Dominicana asked her son why he thought this was the case, he just shrugged, smiled, and told her that he could solve math problems either on paper or with his eyes closed. It didn't matter, and sometimes even in his dreams. During the late afternoon and some evenings, when the old mad pirate and Maxwell wandered the city together, she went to the library and continued her studies with Afra, the librarian. By this point, all Afra had to do was suggest a novel or two and send the Dominicana off into a quiet corner of the library to digest it. She spent long, humid evenings reading until the old mad pirate and Maxwell came to walk her home, or on some occasions bring her dinner, which they had bought at the city market. When her husband wasn't working, he came with Maxwell. And on these nights, the pirate and his son would hide behind bookshelves in a variety of hide and seek and watch her read. The pirate would whisper to his son that he had a very beautiful and a very brilliant mother in Max.
Uh-oh. Suspenseful.
Hey, Michael, you paused for us. We've got a little glitch.
Michael, come back.
Come back, Michael.
Maxwell would nod. Then the pirate and his son would cough loudly, making their presence known, and the Dominicana would book down.
Thank you all for your patience.
Oh. It worked before when we said, Michael, come back.
Oh,
should we start clapping?
I'm sure Michael will be back at any second. I'm sure y'all have been to one of these before. We all know what a horrible and capricious beast internet is for all of us.
The magic of the internet.
Yeah. So for now, John, with that flawless segue, I would love to have you read.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and, I'm going to follow that. I was going to read Exploding Dicks for Profit, but since that's already been covered, I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm just going to read from, and you can't see it because it's a green screen and my book is green. It's The Last Emperor. That's really kind of funny. Sorry. And I'm going to read from chapter 8. And just in case you don't know, The Last Emperor is the third book in the Interdependence series. It's about or the end of civilization and how people are dealing with it. And in chapter 8, I'm talking about
John, I'm so sorry to say this. You're a little bit glitchy too.
So, no.
Yeah. Yes.
No.
I'm sorry. You were great all during us testing it. I don't know what's happened. So was Michael. Can you try another sentence or two just to make sure we don't lose you completely?
So are you speaking to me or are you speaking
Yes.
to Michael?
No,
Me.
Michael's gone so far as
Michael's
we can
gone.
tell.
Okay, how's it now?
Now
Better?
it seems good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the problem is because I live out in the middle of nowhere, and so I have to rely on a hotspot, and every once in a while it'll drop out. It's the magic of living in rural America. Anyway, Last Night Pro, end of the universe. How are people planning for the end of the universe? And this is how it goes. While the elite of the interdependency were making their plans to abandon the common people to their fate, the common people of the interdependency were beginning to come to grips with what exactly that fate was. It should be noted that the common people of the interdependency were not fools. They were arguably the most educated and materially comfortable common people ever to live in any human civilization, going back to when the first human decided hoofing themselves across the African landscape was a pain in the ass and decided to stay in one place instead. The population of the interdependency were not fools, largely for two reasons. The first was that the vast majority of the interdependency's billions of souls lived their lives either in cities hollowed out from the ground of otherwise uninhabitable planets or inside habitats floating in space. In either of these environments, a large population of the uneducated and feral would be a clear and present safety issue for everyone else. The second reason was that the ruling class of the interdependency, favoring financial and social stability over having the lumpen proletariat trying to rip their heads from their necks at every opportunity, opted to have the interdependency baseline standard of living one where no one starved or was without shelter or died of easily preventable diseases or went bankrupt if they had a heart attack or lost a job or both. For these reasons, the interdependency held no poor or rabble in ways the elite of previous civilizations would understand the term. This was great if your goal was keeping a large population of humans spread across trillions of kilometers of physical space reasonably content on a day-to-day basis. It was less great if your goal was to, say, leave these billions completely in the dark about the encroaching end of civilization that was likely to result in slow famine and death for each of them if nothing was done. They knew, and they knew reasonably early in the grand scheme of things. But what did they do with that information? A large number of people looked at when their particular system would be entirely cut off from the rest of the interdependency, decided it was enough time in the future that someone would probably figure out what to do, and then went back to their daily lives only mildly more apprehensive than before. The more ambitious planned protests and conferences and composed strongly worded missives to their local system and interdependency ministers of parliament, saying in no uncertain terms, something should be done. And that's what they were elected for. Then they, too, mostly went back to their lives under the impression that they at least had done something. Another group, which might charitably be called entrepreneurs, or less charitably grifters, saw in the end of the world a business opportunity and began to target the particularly fearful, anxious, and inconsolable. That went as it usually does. A rather smaller group of people looked at how the flow streams that were still open, saw how long it would be before it would be impossible to catch the last ship to end from where they were, and started making plans to catch those ships at or near the last possible instant, saving up all the while. This crafty bit of foresight was undercut by the fact that these people generally did not, in fact, make those reservations paid in full the second they thought of it. It meant that when they did get around to it, they would discover that every passenger berth had been reserved years in advance and at exorbitant rates. After all, these days, when a ship went to end, it stayed at end forever. These people had already missed their chance to escape, and they didn't even know it. They likely couldn't have afforded it anyway. Cheerful, right? I mean, it's no exploding dick, but it's not great.
Listen, we can't all compete with exploding dicks. That's just too much to
Nor
ask of
should
the rest
we.
of us.
Yes, nor should we.
Michael, I'm so glad to see you back.
Had an interruption. The internet just shut off, but I'm back. I'm here. I'm happily back.
Yay!
Yay, we missed you
you.
dearly. Do you want to finish the last minute of your reading that you had?
Sure. Very, very short. Very short. I'll finish it
let's
up.
do it.
Yeah. So Afterward, while walking home, the pirate and her son would ask her what she had been reading, and she would describe the novels she had read in great detail. Then the Dominicana and her family would make up stories about Babylon or immortal warriors or space travel, after which they would walk in silence through the gray and rose-colored streets of New Orleans and think about the possibility of their stories, as if thinking about them made them real, which was a true reflection of literature and happiness. In particular, the Dominicana enjoyed the horror and science fiction novels of North America and England, H.P. Lovecraft, Ambrose Bierce, H.G. Wells, and Mary Shelley, whose Frankenstein she thought had marked the dawn of a new and terrifying era. In addition to the lesser-known writers she found in literary magazines and pamphlets dedicated entirely to the genre. And while she couldn't be certain why she enjoyed these writers, she thought it might have something to do with the sorts of people who came from empires, people who suffered from a sense of unreality. But through unreality, the Dominicana thought, they understood at least one thing, that people could be other people, cities could be other cities, and worlds could be other worlds. I'll stop there.
That was such an apt and wonderful place to leave the readings in a fundraiser for a science fiction fantasy bookstore. So I thought in order to get y'all comfortable before I grill you with really hard hitting and personal questions, we could do a little bit of rapid fire, which is where I ask you questions, this or that, and you have to answer with no explanation, and you do not get to justify yourself. Does it sound good?
Sure.
Amazing. Michael, I'm going to start with you this time.
All
Cats
right.
or dogs?
Dogs.
Pizza or French fries?
Pizza.
Arsenic or grenades?
Grenades.
Sunrise, sunset?
Sunset.
100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck?
1 horse-sized duck.
Okay. John, cats or dogs?
Cats.
Pizza or French fries?
Pizza.
Arsenic or grenades?
Arsenic.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck?
Big ass duck.
And Gailey, cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Pizza or French fries?
Pizza.
Arsenic or grenades?
Arsenic.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunrise.
100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck?
Romantically the latter, in combat the former.
Amazing. I'm also excited that dogs have won by democracy today. Sorry, John. So, all of you have written kind of about history through science fiction or the history of science fiction. And for Michael specifically, what was so important about Adana Moreau to be a science fiction author specifically?
Specifically, I think there's so much in the novel itself. The Dominicana is in exile in 1916, and so she's living in the Dominican Republic when the American Marines invade, and as our empire tends to do, they invade in otherworldly means with massive marine ships, with sudden infantry. The experience of that felt quite familiar, you know, having family growing up in Ecuador, and that experience itself is so much internalized when you're an immigrant or when you're first generation as almost a narrowly science fiction experience. I became vastly interested in the history of science fiction and how the writers, especially during the 1920s and post-World War II, were sort of inhabiting a space in which they had experienced these large-scale traumas, and that was embedded in the work that they did. So I became very fascinated with that. I couldn't see any other avenue for someone like her to be a writer in that time.
Do you mind me asking just a little bit, if you could speak a little bit more on what you mean by being an immigrant is like a science fiction experience?
Absolutely. So, I mean, especially finding yourself with a new language, a new reality, finding yourself on the shores of a new country feels like you're, you know, the analogy being feels like you're entering a parallel universe with all of its rules, with all of its bureaucracy, with all of its unknowns. I always remarked watching my father learn learn English when he was moved to the United States, that I learned English with him when I was a child, and it was like experiencing a new reality and what that entailed. So it only deepened my interest in science fiction when I was young.
That's wonderful. Sarah, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your research into your alt histories like River of Teeth and Upright Women Wanted. Although Upright Women Wanted, is that necessarily an alternate history?
No. For anyone who's unfamiliar, Upright Women Wanted is my novella, and it actually takes place in the future. It takes place in a near future American Southwest in which the US is an authoritarian, fascist, imperialist state. In a little bit more, the dial has been turned a little bit more forward on kind of what we're already headed toward now. And as a result, people have to live in the same way that they did in the Wild West. My research for this was kind of brain destroying because it really felt like looking into a crystal ball. Just the way that I built the world was very much around what happens when authoritarian, fascist, imperialist regimes get their way a lot and divert all of their resources into military support, and how that expands to affect culture and economics and, you know, the infrastructure, the status of road maintenance, like everything. Really just drags people into a place of self-sufficiency and does that on a level where, you know, you can't even depend on your community to support you and take care of you, because in a fascist state, you know, it's very much about pitting people against each other and undermining community trust and a sense of community-based support. So that was the research that I did for this, was like, hey, what was it like to live in Germany toward like the end of World War II as a citizen, not as somebody who was being actively pursued, persecuted, jailed, tortured, and murdered, but like as someone who was like, this is the country where I live. How's that going for you? And the answer is not great, not super awesome. And I tried to bring all of that just into this book, which is about a young woman who is kind of leaving the town where she grew up and experiencing the rest of her little corner of the country. And she's not necessarily discovering new things about how other people live, but she is discovering the reasons behind why they live the way they do. That, you know, none of us often think to question when we're growing up. You kind of, you swim in the water that you're born in and you say, okay, this is the temperature that it is. And you don't think to ask, is someone artificially heating this water up to cook me? I don't know, that metaphor got away from me, but.
I think you stuck the landing. I followed it. I wonder too, just because I don't want them to go unmentioned, about the research you did for River of Teeth as well. Because I like, anytime I have you in public, I'm going to make you talk about hippos, is my point.
Yeah, so River of Teeth is, and Taste of Marrow are the American Hippo books. They're the first two things I ever published of length. And they're an alternate history in which Congress's nascent plan to import hippos for meat consumption in the US and also to try and address an ecological disaster, the invasive water hyacinth, which looks like this. If that had actually happened, I'm gonna tell you, it would have been a bad time, because hippos love murder. It's all they do for fun. They kill people just all the time. They can run faster than you. They can swim faster than you. Their tusks are the size of my forearm, and they're mean, and they don't have a social contract that they adhere to in any way. And if they see you from a distance and they're like, I think maybe you should be dead, then you're gonna probably be dead. And you can't even escape them by climbing up trees, because they have enough weight to actually knock trees over if they decide so thoroughly enough that you should die. So I did a lot of research into hippos. It was really fun because hippo biology is something that hippos ignore. You know, a lot of people have come to me and been like, hippos are herbivores, they would never eat people. And that's just not true. Like, yeah, they are herbivores, they don't need meat to live, but like, I don't need an entire sleeve of Oreos to live. You know, so if we're gonna have that conversation, we can have that conversation, but I don't think humans are gonna come out on the side of logic and science on this one. I also did a lot of research into just the history of humans making bad decisions about ecosystems. You know, the world building of this book is very much about what happens if an invasive megafauna comes and takes over your entire like river delta complex. In this book, they're in the bayous of Louisiana, which they would like, okay. But again, they don't really care where you put them. They're like, great, I'm a hippo, I'm gonna live and destroy your life. Humans love doing this. It's like our favorite thing to do. We love to be like, oh, nature's doing a thing, I think we could make it better by taking a piece from over here and putting it here, and then this new piece is like, great, I'm destroying this entire like lake. I'm destroying, the river directions in Yellowstone Park. There's so many carp. Like, it's just what we do all the time. And so I did a lot of research into that and how thoroughly human beings fuck everything up that we touch.
We're perfect. This is literally happening in Colombia with hippos right now because of Pablo Escobar's zoo. Anyway,
Right.
with literally hippos, it's wild. Sorry, we're not going to spend this whole time talking about hippos as much as I'd like to. John, hello. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your thought process behind having a huge political struggle at the same time as people are trying to deal with an unsustainable system breaking down. And what it's like to write people who don't know what they're doing in the face of a huge threat. I don't know how that's relevant to us.
Well, the first thing you do is you start with hippos, okay? Once you get the hippos there, everything falls apart. So, but more specifically, the funny thing about it is, and I think Gailey put their finger right on it, is humans have a really good propensity for messing things up because they think that they're smarter and craftier and have better plans than nature and the universe and everything else. Because we are the only animals that we know that think the way we do and how we do and so on and so forth, we basically don't have any sort of frame of reference for what things we should not be doing. And so it's very easy for us to sort of get way over the ledge in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing and not realizing until the hippos take over the bayou or the carp take over the river or, the zebra mussels take over the Great Lakes. That maybe that wasn't such a great idea. The cats in Australia, so to speak. And so knowing this about humans over and over and over and over again, plus the propensity of humans to go, there is no problem so critical that we can't pass the buck on to the next generation. That is something we're also really, really good with. But knowing these things about humans, that this is just basic human, the way that humans basically function, it doesn't matter where you place the humans in terms of time scale. If you put them 5,000 years ago, or if you put them in current day, if you put them 1,500 years in the future, unless you've massively changed their biology and the way that they work and they think, they're still going to be the same animals running the same software. They're still going to have the same fuck-ups. And so all you have to do is plug the humans into any situation and then just watch them cycle through what it is they're doing. And it sounds depressing because it is depressing, but also the other thing that we have to recognize about humans is that although it takes us until the very last possible second to do the thing that we should have done 10, 15, 20, 100 years before, we do eventually get to that point out of self-preservation, if nothing else.
So I feel like that.
I generally feel, I was about to say, despite the fact that I feel that humans will always get themselves into a big trouble, I am weirdly optimistic in the long run that we will find some way to persevere. We'll do a lot of damage before we get there, but we'll manage.
I feel like that segues so perfectly into my last question, which is for all of you, which is just the way that history and historic parallels inform your work and how you bring that kind of baggage into your craft. And it's for all of you, so feel free to interrupt each other and step on each other's feet.
I'll add to John, and I'll say one of the most astounding moments I had when I studied evolutionary biology and literature at the same time in college. But I remember some years after that reading about Neolithic sort of approaches to hunting mammoths. And there were Neolithic tribes that would run an entire mammoth herd off a cliff for one or two mammoths. There's no way they could be. And I constantly think the writer in me was like, who was the child telling their parents, stop fucking doing this? Stop running entire like mammoth herds off the cliff. We need them for, you know, for us. So I agree with John on that. I absolutely agree that sort of the propensity for humans to not reconcile with the future and only have this ability to be sort of short-sighted. With how that impacts sort of my writing and with this novel and thinking about other works is I was always sort of fascinated with the idea of the empire coming home. So kind of building off both what everyone was saying, this idea that so many Americans, and you know, I really liked actually the boiling water metaphor, because that's what it feels like almost when you're an immigrant in the United States and you know what the empire has already done in other places. You know the empire in the Middle East and Africa and South America have been there with their monstrosities of military. And we only are faintly recognizing that right now, that now that we've sort of run out of markets, militarized markets abroad, we're bringing them home. And this has sort of been the last project of the 20 years, but I really thinking about, when I sat down to write this novel, thinking about how that ties in to the early 20th century. And so much of being Latin American is, you know, the things we're on the streets about today. We were in the streets in Buenos Aires and Quito, in Colombia 30, 40 years ago. And so that reconciling the empire coming home with its militarized market is something I was always very fascinated about. And that acceptance of fascism in slow motion and then very impending quick means is, you know, my mother's family is Jewish, my father's family is Latin American. So I remember joking with other first generation Americans in my high school. There was particularly this amazing friend I've had since high school, and she's a Syrian, and her family had escaped Iraq in the 1980s, and she has been telling me for 30 years, the empire is going to come home one day, and what you see in Iraq will be here. And that's all she texts me right now. It's like, see, I told you 20 years ago, and I'm like, so that fascination sort of turned into the work of not only the history of science fiction, but the history of how the stories of science fiction came from sort of these markets of empire.
Yeah.
I really love that way of phrasing that the empire is coming home. As someone who grew up in the empire, like very steeped in the things that the empire wants children to know growing up about what is happening in other parts of the world and why things are happening in other parts of the world. I had a liberal family who would say like, we don't know about all this, but I didn't have any of the perspective that, you know, someone living in another part of the world and looking at us from the outside would have about what the United States does and stands for and propagates. And I think this might be like a desperate grasp at optimism, which I'm very willing to admit. But I think when I bring my understanding of history into my work, I try to smash it together with the way that I and so many people I know over especially the last like 5-10 years have been trying to peel scales away from our eyes. And I try to put those things together and say, there are always people in the inside of any empire, under the boot of any empire, who are trying and who are forming community to try and help people survive the horrors that empire inflicts on the world, and who are on the inside of an empire at every level of learning, trying to do right and trying to do good, even if they're completely failing, even if they're working on bad information as they try to do good. I try to bring that into everything I write, just that understanding that like, you can try to stop fucking up. You can. You don't have to keep leaning into it. You don't have to go, well, I know that it's wrong that I did this thing, but it makes me feel bad when people tell me that was wrong, so I'm going to do it more. You can instead do what I, in all of my research, have seen people doing over and over and over again, of saying, oh, it feels really bad to learn that the place that I live is bad. I'm going to try and see if there's a way I can help make it not bad. Or, oh man, that bad place is hurting me and everyone I love so much. I'm going to try and help as many of us survive it as possible. That might be a bleak optimism, but that's what I kind of cling to, especially right now.
And to follow up on that, one of the things that we as science fiction writers do, I think, is not only do we take what we've learned from before, but we model the futures that we want to see, or that we want to, sometimes what we want to warn about, but sometimes what we want to see. So when I write about the future, I write about a future where maybe people learned, right? Maybe people figured it out, where even if people are still venal and greedy and awful and all those sorts of things, they can also still be recognizing that they are part of a community, that there is a world that is better that they can help achieve, and that so many of the issues that we are living with now and we are wrestling with now are, if not solved, changed substantially, that the people who are reading it today can see, well, okay, maybe that particular problem we got through, and we were able to develop whole new problems that, you know, we will be able to solve in 1,500 years' time. We have the ability and sort of the privilege, if you want to put it that way, of being able to say, here's the universe, or here's the future that I want, and maybe show a little bit of how we get there. Now, are we actually going to get there? Who knows? You know, science fiction writers are wrong more often than they are not, which is why whenever we get something right, we'll be like, yes, I did take credit for that. But be that as it may, the fact that we do have that opportunity makes it fundamentally, it can be a very optimistic genre in ways that others can't.
I have this fascination with theoretical physics because of that what if. And whether it's quantum or whether it's this bubble universe expanding into all variable possibilities of matter, this fundamental core question of what if, and I think for writers themselves, it's a question of language, it's a question of possibility. And at the core of it, it's like, I'm going to agree that I have an exterior shell as a nihilist, but inside I'm an optimist secretly. So it's a hard balance. But that question of what if sustains me, especially hearing young people who not only are committed to the what if, but put it into action and put it into words. And, you know, writing a novel is sort of like a quantum experience. You're attempting to project those futures. And I think it's a viable way for readers to think about what is possible, not only in story, but in actual practice. That simple question keeps me an optimist too. Although my black shirt and nihilism on top of that might say otherwise.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about young people. Young people feed my optimism all the time, especially as I see their, how to put this. When I was a young teenager, I definitely had the perspective that you should trust adults by default to know more than you. And I see teenagers now being like, no, that's not true. And also, I'm pissed that you're trying to tell me it might be true because I know it's not true. And I can see the consequences of it not being true. And seeing their anger and their drive makes me feel so much more optimistic, because I'm like, great, awesome. Like, you're figuring out stuff that it took me until yesterday to figure out.
I taught dropouts in Chicago for 10 years, and they were people who were most impacted by empire, right? Most impacted by the sort of the fallacies and the racism and classism that exists. And we could get into that, but the point is they came to me on the assumption that things were broken because of adults. And it was a beautiful thing to experience that with them and talk about stories through that.
I've never met.
Perfect. I'll segue us flawlessly into questions from the audience. I think the best one to start with is one that is also a compliment. This is from CJ. This is for all of you. Do you have tips for giving such great readings? How do you prepare to read your work out loud? And they didn't say this, but flawlessly.
Flawlessly. I think you have to start off with the idea that you are not just reading, but you're performing. And because you're performing, that you want to inhabit characters, that you want the words to actually not just be recited, but to be spoken and have a flow and all that sort of stuff. So if you go in with the understanding that you are actually giving a performance and not just reading static words, that's going to make a huge difference just starting off.
I was cursed and gifted with a father who told 45-minute jokes in Spanish. So I think of him often when I'm reading.
I would say this is like it's kind of a silly technical thing, but I think about it every time I'm preparing for a reading, which is the emotional speed of the scene and having the performance of the reading reflect that emotional speed. So when I'm reading a scene that needs to be kind of suspenseful and like dramatic and heavy, I'll slow down quite a lot. But like in the piece that I read today, it's a very anxious scene. The character is feeling very overwhelmed, so I'll speed up a lot, and moderating that speed over the course of a reading to let big beats land, like the sentences that when you write them, you're like, yeah, I did it. I did a good one. You can use the speed of how you're reading to make it so the audience also goes like, oh, wow, that was a good one.
This question is for Michael from Venkata. The Lost Book of Adana Moreau is one of my favorite novels of this year. The book within a book structure is brilliant in the way that the characters in each narrative shapes the characters in the other. What was your writing and revision process like, working with these different stories into a seamless, they said, seamless narrative, and having them influence each other?
Well, first off, thank you so much. That's so meaningful to hear. The structure itself sort of arose concurrently with the idea of it centering around a science fiction novelist who was writing about parallel universes. And of course, her son, who becomes a theoretical physicist who's looking for evidence of parallel universes in the future. It felt very sort of natural to me in which the book itself would be stories and worlds built off of worlds. And that structure made sense to me from the beginning. It's also a structure that is very much more common in Latin American literature. I just said that my father would tell a 45-minute joke, and only the punchline in the intro would contain anything related to each other. So there's this tradition, very much in Latin American oral tradition and also literature. We think of Borges, who would, building these narratives inside of narratives, and Don Quixote does that, and as the first modern novel. So all of it felt very natural to me. That is to say, I ended up cutting a lot of the ones that didn't work. And some of the most joyful parts of writing this novel, if there can be joy found in writing along work, was writing summaries of science fiction novels that I knew I didn't have time on this planet to get to, but I wanted to very much feel what those stories would look like on the page.
That's wonderful. This is a question from Aura for John. The Interdependency is one of my favorite space operas ever. What are the odds of seeing more writings from you in this millennia-old universe you'd created, even if it won't include the irreverent Lady Kiva Lagos?
I never say never. I have a lot of books that I have to get through first. You may have heard that I have a big contract with a bunch of books on it. So I have to get through those before I think of adding any more books to it. That said, when I originally imagined the Interdependency series, it was 2 books. And the first book actually covered the entire collapse, right? And then the second book would take place 5,000 years in the future. And so through the writing, I found out that one, I wasn't going to cover the collapse in one book. It actually was going to take 3 books. And so that trilogy got that way. So theoretically, there's a whole 5,000 year in the future story that I had already been thinking about that I could approach and build out. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible it could happen. And if a mysterious large basket of money showed up on my door tomorrow, maybe I would put that on the schedule. So Tor, if you're listening, basket of money. Okay, there you go.
I would love to be at the place in my career where I could start demanding baskets of money.
Just a basket of money. There's nothing wrong with it. Everybody likes a basket of money.
You got to manifest that,
like,
Maggie.
Yeah, thin envelope of money. Sarah, I want you to know that I've exercised great maturity and restraint, and I'm not asking you the question about bookstore hippos, even though that is my favorite question. I'm going to ask you this question from Jody instead. They say, when I read Magic for Liars, I was so happy. I felt like I can quit writing because Sarah has made the books I want to read. Just kidding. 1, what can we expect from when can we expect, a Magic for Liars sequel? And 2, do you have any advice on writing a system of magic in this modern world and what to pay attention to and what not to get caught up on?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do the easy part first. The question about a sequel, I'll just crib this directly from John and say I'll never say never. But then the whole rest of my answer is going to be different. But I will still take a basket of money for any reason. I don't currently have any plans to write more in that world. I feel like I told the story that I really wanted to tell, which was the story of two sisters and the differences between them and the wedges in their relationship. That said, you know how there's lots of writers out there who are like, oh, this is my intellectual property and fan fiction is disrespectful, and if you write fan fiction, you're disrespecting my legacy. I'm not one of those. And I strongly, vehemently encourage anyone who wants to play around in that world to do it. I'm a big proponent of fan fiction. I encourage it. Just don't send it to me because there's like legal stuff that can happen that I only loosely understand and don't want to get caught up in. The second half of that question was about developing a magic system. And this is the part of writing where I am the worst person you've ever met, because I pretty much didn't develop a magic system for any of the magical worlds that I've written. What I do is I say magic exists, and because it's magic, it's not something that can be systematized. And this is just my line of thinking. There are lots of people who disagree with me on this, but my perspective on magic is that if you can understand it well enough to make a comprehensive system for it, then it stops being magic and it turns into science. And that's not what I'm writing. I also approach magic the same way that people in the reality that I live in approach science, which is to say that you can try your hardest to understand it, right? In Magic for Liars, everyone is studying it. The book takes place at a school that is dedicated to educating people about magic. People are trying their hardest to get it and get a grasp on it, but you're never going to actually understand all of it. And the harder you try to understand it, like with theoretical physics, the harder it becomes to understand. The easiest to understand magic is in When We Were Magic, the YA that I read from at the top of this, where basically the people who have magic powers are like, I don't know, I can do this stuff. Whoops, it killed someone, which is how we often approach science in our day-to-day lives. And in Magic for Liars, the attempt to comprehend magic and the attempt to turn it into a system and get to the bottom of it causes enormous consequences relationally, emotionally, and materially. So I don't develop magic systems. I just let magic be what it is. Sorry, I'm the worst.
That's not at all. And I've heard one of the things that I think is true about the logic of the magic in your worlds is that it's not just like made up. It always feels like the magic fits within the plot. It doesn't feel like you ever just introduce it to be like, and ta-da, now there's a solution. And so I don't think that you're selling yourself a little short is my point. Okay. For our last audience question, I feel like it's the best question to ask authors in a fundraiser for independent bookstores. It's worth noting that Dark Carnival does not have an online store and they are not connected to bookshop.org. So we cannot tell you to buy these authors' books from them online. They'll open back up hopefully at some point and then you'll be able to buy them in person. But until then, please support any other independent bookstore of your choosing to buy Sarah Gailey, John Scalzi's, and Michael Zapata's books. But this question is from Joy, and it is from everyone. What has been your favorite book this year read, not necessarily released?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Man.
I love every time you ask authors this, they're like, I've never read a book before. I don't know what to do.
You know, the thing is that, you know, there's two things that go on. One, because we do read a lot, or at least I try to read a lot, you know, to keep up with everything. And there's so much good stuff, especially recently. And second of all, it's like we all know each other. So you're like, you know, pick the one friend that's going to be on the lifeboat with you, right? And so you're like, so if you pick one, you feel like you're saying to all the rest of the friends, you can swim. It's only the Atlantic in January.
Here's what we'll stipulate. It's none of that. Let's just shoot from the hip of a book that you thought recently. It doesn't have to be your favorite necessarily. It's just the one that comes to mind right now. We're playing a free association game. There is no hierarchy. Also, did we lose Michael again?
Yeah, I think Michael dropped out.
Oh no.
Come back, Michael. We miss you. We love you.
In the meantime, what are some books that come to mind that you have read this year that you enjoyed, that you're not kicking anyone off a lifeboat for?
I'm at the ready. I'm like champing at the bit. Other than The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea by Maggie Takuta Hall, which is a brilliant and devastating novel about trauma, the cost of violence, identity, and empire. Other than that one, which, by the way, you can buy everywhere books are sold, I just finished reading a book that is now in my pantheon of favorite nonfiction books alongside H is for Hawk and Lady from the Black Lagoon. It's called Why Fish Don't Exist, A Story of Loss, Love, and the Hidden Order of Life. It's written by Lulu Miller. I just pulled it up on my phone to make sure that I remembered the author's name right. And it is one of the most brilliant, devastating books I've ever read. It's part memoir and part biography of a scientist who was very dedicated to taxonomy and ichthyology. And it's a book that I recommend doing no research about the subject matter before you go into, because that's how I read it. And it's a book that presents a story and then puts another layer on top of that story and says, how does that change everything that you perceive about the people involved? And then it puts another layer on top and says, how does that change everything you perceive about the people involved? It's completely brilliant. It's extremely honest. It does a lot of really difficult examination of the impact of science on society. And it's also quietly a queer book, and you should read it. It's so good.
For me, I do have a book that I've been reading this year that I came out a couple years before, and I didn't know that it did. For books that are very recently, The City We Became, which is Nora Jemison's new book, is fabulous. I also really like Riot Baby, which is a novella which just came out recently as well. But before I wrote science fiction, I was a journalist and I was a humorist. And so I've been reading this, which is The Most of Nora Ephron. She is a journalist and a humorist and literally one of the funniest people in the history of the world. She's probably best known for writing Sleepless in Seattle and When Harry Met Sally. So much of what I think of humor comes from her sort of humor. And so when I discovered that this compilation of like stuff that she'd written over the course of 30 years existed in one place where I could just read it all, I immediately bought it, and I have been sort of sampling like 2 or 3 pages at a time, you know, sort of stretching it out. Because one, such a fabulous writer. 2, I think it's really important for people in genre to read outside of genre, too, because they can bring what they've learned into genre. And 3, just good writing is good writing. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with that.
Amazing. Well, because Michael's internet is down, I'm going to take a liberty and tell you should all read A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow as well. It is about 2 teenage Black girls who live in Portland, which you can imagine is a pretty white environment. One of them is a siren. There is a sexy talking gargoyle. It's got everything. I highly recommend it. And it pairs particularly well with the nonfiction book Push Out, which is about the way that institutions push Black girls out of institutional spaces like schools particularly. Y'all, this has been so much fun. I'm so sorry that we've lost Michael for the end of this event because he's perfect and brilliant, and I so enjoyed hearing from him. But John and Sarah, where can people find more of your work online?
I have a website, Scalzi.com, or just type whatever into Google. It will, you will find it there. Also, let me give a shout out to my local independent bookseller, which is Jane Mary's Book Center of Troy, Ohio. If you call and order books from there, they're usually signed, and if you ask and can wait for me to actually go down there, I will personalize them as well. So I always encourage people to support their local bookstores wherever they are, but if you want something signed, this is the easiest way to do that.
You can find me at sarahgailey.com, where you can find links to everything I've written that's available to read for free online there. You can also find links to buy my books, which are everywhere that books are sold. And I also have a subscription newsletter where for the past couple of months I've been helping people triage quarantine recipes out of what they have in their cupboards so that they don't have to go to the store and put themselves at risk. So you can sign up for that. And you can find me on social media at Gailey Frey.
I was emailing with Michael on the side, and I asked him if there was a book that he wants everyone to read. And he says with 5 exclamation points, The Everlasting of Kate by Katie Simpson Smith. Oh, Michael, you're back. Well, just in time. We're so sorry. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here. This was a We Love Bookstores event. If we could unmute Michael, maybe he can tell us about The Everlasting real quickly.
Thank you, everyone. I apologize. Internet's a little rough here. Everlasting by Katie Simpson Smith. It's generally a historical novel, but there's this brilliant interception of the devil, and it covers 2,000 years of the history of Rome through 4 characters. Highly recommended. It came out in the midst of this pandemic, so it did not get the attention it so thoroughly deserves. It's a brilliant venture into speculative history.
Amazing. Y'all, thank you so much. As mentioned, we raised over $3,400 for Dark Carnival Books in Berkeley today.
Oh, yeah.
Cherish and support your local independent bookstores. Thank you guys so much for being here. Sarah, John, Michael, you're all beautiful and perfect and look like Linda Evangelista. Thank you for being here. And there's just no not awkward way to end this, so.
And now we're all leaving. Bye.
Bye. Maggie is perfect.